Hey everyone, my name is Steve, and in today's tutorial we're going to be implementing logic related to sheathing and unsheathing an equipped item. In our case it's going to be this sword, but you can totally follow along with any other item that you want your character to be holding. And today we're going to be exploring a few new nodes that we haven't used before, namely this select node and this Boolean not node. Both are extremely useful in whatever you do in Unreal Engine. This tutorial is a part of a longer tutorial series that we've done on this channel, and as such it already includes some blueprints and some code that we've implemented previously. So if this is the first video from the series that you're seeing, you essentially have two options. The first option is to go to the first link in the description, which leads you to the playlist, and you can start from the first video and follow along and build everything for yourself. Or if you want to skip straight to this video, go to the other link, which leads to my Patreon, where you can download the starting course file for free, I have to mention. It just requires a little bit of a setup. So whatever you prefer, go do that now, and let's get started with the tutorial. If you're starting with the Patreon files, then you have a placeholder cube here. So the first step would be to go to the Fab Marketplace and import a different asset that you want your character to interact with. If you've been following along, then you already have your weapon or your item here, and you can skip this step. So in my content browser, I'm going to navigate to the Fab Marketplace. I'm going to type in sword. I'm going to do free products only. And I'm going to go with this sword from AGTRI Studios with a personal license, add to project. Once it's done, you will see the medieval sword folder in your content browser. So I'm going to navigate back. And in my content browser, in the tutorial content, I'm going to find the BP sword. And here in the viewport, I'm just going to select the static mesh component called sword, or I'm going to click just the cube. And in the right hand side over here, I'm going to replace the cube with my sword. I'm going to save and compile. And now if I go back to the game, everything should be wired up. So you should have your item in game, and the logic that allows you to pick it up and then drop it should be already implemented. Let's now implement the sword sheathing logic. So first thing is that we will need an extra input for this. So I'm going to navigate to the tutorial content input folder, which where we need the actions folder, and we're going to create new input action. So right click, input, input action, and I'm going to do IA underscore weapon sheath. That's all we need to do. We don't even need to open this because we can use the default settings of a new input action. I'm going to go back to the input folder, which holds my IMC underscore tutorial input mapping context. I'm going to open that one. And here in the default key mappings, in the mappings array, I'm going to add a new one. And here I'm going to select the one that I just created, which is called weapon sheath. The only thing that we need to do here is define the key that we want to use to trigger this action. So I'm going to click the keyboard button over here, and I'm going to press, for example, E. It can be literally anything, again, as long as it doesn't collide with the other inputs that we already have set up. And there is one more thing that we need to do before we start building the blueprint, which is we need to create a new socket that's going to be used to hold the weapon once it's sheathed. So for this, we're going to navigate to characters, mannequins, and then meshes, and we go to the skeleton mesh. Depending on which mannequin you are using in your game, I recommend choosing the correct one in the preview mesh in the top left corner. So I'm working with the many, so I'm going to change it over just so it's more accurate whenever I preview it here. Now, through a little bit of testing, I've decided that I'm going to create the socket on the spine 05 bone. So I'm just going to right click the spine. I'm going to add socket. It's going to give it the default name spine underscore 05 socket, which is fine for our use case. And then I'm going to right click on the socket and add preview asset. Here again, we're going to type in the name of the asset that we've imported from Fab. In my case, it's sm_sword. As you can see, the socket is rotated completely incorrectly, but we can fix that very easily. So first, I'm just going to move it a little bit back, so the sword is actually placed on the back. Next, I'm gonna just rotate the sword. I think I'm gonna have it tilted a little bit to the right like this. Then obviously I'm gonna rotate it so it's flat on the back. And now I'm gonna move it again a little bit upward. I think this is good enough for the purpose of this tutorial. So I'm just gonna click save. And next we need to navigate into the character blueprint. So in my case, it's saved in the tutorial content folder. So I'm going to go to the BP tutorial character. And that brings me to the blueprint section where we have all the other logic implemented for picking up the weapon, dropping the weapon. And just below that, we're going to start implementing the sheathing logic. The first node that we will need is the one to trigger this whole action. So for that, we're going to use the input action that we have just created. So that we have called that weapon sheath. Next, I'm gonna grab the attach actor to component node from up here because that's the mechanism that we're gonna use, because we have already spawned the sword by this point whenever we're trying to like sheath it or unsheath it, so it's already existing. So we're just gonna reuse the logic that just attaches it to a different socket essentially. So the socket name that we used up there is the hand grip _R, but obviously the one that we need is spine 05 socket. So we can grab that from the skeletal mesh. I'm just gonna copy and paste the name exactly to avoid typos. And we're gonna leave the rest as it is. Snap to target is the setting that we want. Of course, we have to say what are we attaching. So we're gonna grab a reference to the equipped weapon variable and connect that to the target, which is essentially saying what are we attaching. And then we need to define the parent as well, which essentially says to what are we attaching it. So for that, I'm gonna grab the reference of the character mesh, just like we did every time before. So this says essentially whenever the user starts pressing this button, we're gonna attach the equipped weapon to the character mesh. And we can actually go and test this out. So I'm gonna save and compile. I'm gonna go to the game. I'm gonna pick up the sword and I'm gonna press E. And as you can see, it switches the sword from the hand to the back socket. Now, there is one thing that I would like to improve. Right now, the code runs every time the user presses the E key, which doesn't always make sense because the weapon is not always equipped. So I'm gonna add a branch node that's only allow us to trigger the rest of the code whenever there is actual weapon equipped. So I'm gonna drag from the started, I'm gonna type it branch, and the condition that we're gonna be checking is weapon equipped, which is a Boolean variable that we already have from the previous code. So we're just gonna get the current value of it, which is either true or false, either a weapon is or is not equipped. We're gonna check that. And if a weapon is equipped, this is gonna evaluate to true, and that's when we wanna run the code. If a weapon is not equipped, then obviously I don't wanna do anything. Let's expand this further. Right now, the code only sheaths the weapon from the player hand to the player back, but it doesn't work the other way around. So let's implement the blueprint so that it works both ways. For that, we will need a few things. The first is a new Boolean variable that we will use to check if the weapon is currently on the player's back or in the hand. So I'm going to create new Boolean. It's going to be called isWeaponSheath. And the default value is false. So after we run this code over here, we want to set the weapon to isSheath. So I'm just going to connect the execution line over here. we're going to set this to true. So the only change that we've done at this moment is that whenever this code is run and the weapon moves from the player hand to the player back, aka it gets sheath, we let the game know that, hey, the weapon actually is sheath. So I'm going to grab a reference to this is weapon sheath over here. So this node is just going to tell us is weapon sheath true or false. And based on that, I'm going to use a select name. Select nodes, generally, you can have select name, select integer, all sorts of selects. They kind of work similarly to the branch node, but instead of executing true or false execution logic, they return a certain value based on the condition that you're checking. So just like up here, we're checking is weapon equipped, and then we either run true pin or false pin. Here we check is weapon sheath. If yes, if true, it says pick A, so it would return whatever we write here. And if it's false, then obviously it's going to return whatever we write here in B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the name of the socket that we're using to sheath the weapon, and I'm going to put it in the B slot over here, which essentially means that if is weapon sheath evaluates to false, then the name used in the B over here is going to be returned. So I'm going to plug this in here. And right now it does exactly the same thing that it has done before. But what we can do now is put a name into the A slot over here as well. So I'm just going to grab the socket name of the hand, which is hand grip underscore R from up there. And I'm going to do it, and I'm going to put it into A. So essentially right now, this select node, what it does is it checks is weapon sheath. If yes, that means it's on the back. We're going to return the hand grip as the location or the socket name that we want the sword to place next. So we take it from the back and place it to the hand. And if it's the other way around, if weapon is not sheathed, that means it's in the hand, then this is going to evaluate as false, return this B pin, and we're going to attach the sword to the back. So right now, if I save and compile and I go back to the game, then I can run up to the sword and I press E, it sheaths the sword, and I can press E again and it puts it back into the hand. Now, unfortunately, now I can press E how many more times I want, but it doesn't do anything. But that's a very easy fix. So we can go back to the blueprint over here. And instead of always setting this to true, saying that, hey, the weapon is sheath, we set it to the opposite of whatever the is weapon sheath value has been. What this means is that if we sheath the sword, if we put it on the back, we want to say the sword is sheath. So we want to like flip the Boolean value over here, and vice versa. If it's in the hand, then we want to flip it again so that we can keep repeating this. So instead of just plainly setting it to this, I'm gonna get this is weapon sheath value, like whatever. When this executes, we're gonna check what's the status of is weapon sheath, and we're gonna flip it over using the not Boolean node. So this not node returns the exact opposite of the Boolean over here. So if this is true, the not is going to return false, and vice versa. So we're going to plug this in there and connect this. So just to run through the logic, whenever the user presses the button and has a weapon equipped, which is this check, we're going to attach the actor to component. The actor is always the equipped weapon. The parent is always the mesh, that stays the same. And then based on if the weapon is sheath, we either sheath it by moving it to the spine socket, or unsheath it by moving it to the hand grip socket. And then we flip the value here so that next time when we run this whole logic, the other select runs or returns the value over here. So if I save and compile, go back to the game, I run up to here, and I press E, it sheaths the weapon. I press E, it unsheaths it, and I can keep pressing, and it just switches the position of the sword or of the weapon or whatever item you're using. Now there is one more thing that I want to do, which is I'm gonna go back to the code which we've used for the pickup weapon logic. And after we set is weapon equipped to true, after we actually like pick it up, I'm gonna also set is weapon sheath to true. To false, because the default setting is that it's not sheath. The default setting is that it's in the hand. So we just explicitly say here that the weapon is not on the player's back, so that later this code works properly. Okay, so this is the complete logic for sheathing the weapon. As I just mentioned, you also need to set is weapon sheath to false after you actually pick it up. But this piece of blueprint over here is all the logic that you need to toggle the sheathing from back to hand. And the new key principle that we've learned here is the select node, which, as I mentioned, works very similarly to the branch node, but instead of executing a certain logic based on a condition, we return a value based on a condition. You can have different types of selects. This one returns the name because the name is what we need here for the socket name input. Then this attach actor to component is exactly the same that we've used in the previous episode, so you already know that. And then the other new node that we've used here is this not, which literally just flips the Boolean value of whatever Boolean you plug into it. So in our case, it is weapon sheath. As you know, Boolean can only be true or false. So if this is true, whenever you run this code, then this not is going to flip it to false, and vice versa. If this is false, then this not is going to flip it to true. And the final product is that you can pick up the sword and you can keep pressing E and toggle the location of the sword, either sheath on the back or unsheath in the hand. Alright, I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, please hit that like button. It helps tremendously. If you have any questions, suggestions, ideas for whatever you would like me to work on next, post these in the comments section below. I'm going to be reading and responding to all comments. Or alternatively, join our Discord, link also in the description, where we can chat and figure out what type of content to produce next. And finally, if you're on your Unreal Engine development journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because I'm producing many more tutorials on various topics, from logic implementation, game design principles, and other stuff that's going to be super useful for your own learning and development journey. All right, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.